Hey everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of Paranormal Axetivities with your host Ben Axe. Joining me here today on this lovely Tuesday rainy afternoon. Man, this weather is killing me lately. I'm kind of sick and tired of it. But hey, appreciate you all listening for this awesome jam-packed episode. Here in just a few minutes, we'll have Anthony Tyler, author of Dive Manual, Empirical Investigations of Mysticism, to tell us all about his book and a lot of his theories. Can't wait to talk to him here. But before that, first of all, I just got to say big thank you to all of you guys for listening to the show and taking the time to give me feedback, take all of the time to listen. I know listening to multiple episodes of one podcast can be kind of draining, so I definitely appreciate all the feedback, all the listens, all the time taken. It keeps me going and it makes me happy, and that's what it's all about. So hell yeah. And also coming up, well, right now I guess, is going to be this week's Paranormal Axetivities. Actually, yeah, that's multiple, so Axetivities is the right word there. So yeah, kind of hinted about it on Twitter and Facebook the other day. So as many of you know, I do another podcast called Regularly Scheduled Hostilities every Thursday night with my buddy Josh. And we do it here in the same studio. The RSH and Paranormal Axetivity studios are one in the same, right here in the garage. And I happen to have all of my Halloween shit packed away in the garage as well. And yeah, so him and I were sitting here. I was sitting right where I'm sitting now. Josh was sitting in his chair, and actually his sister Yvonne, who is a part-time, I guess, she's on and off member of the podcast, she was sitting across from me here. And halfway through the show, out of nowhere, the same doll actually that fell during last week's episode that you can see live on YouTube and Facebook, because I filmed that episode live last week, or on video anyway, had that doll standing behind me, and she just fell. Now that was explainable, very explainable. I just had her sitting on a thing. I'm sure it didn't take much for it to collapse. However, this time I had her standing on the floor, and she was kind of packed in between a trash bag and a charcoal bag. I mean, she was sitting there pretty tight. And then out of nowhere, I'm rambling what I'm rambling about, like I always do, and she just starts kind of swaying and shaking back and forth. Like you hear kind of like a bang. And I look over, and Yvonne and Josh are both looking at her, and she's just kind of swaying back and forth for a good few seconds. Like, it didn't just stop right away. It wasn't like she just kind of fell and had to recast her balance because she's standing on the legs. No, I mean, she kept swaying back and forth for, I want to say, 5 to 10 seconds, which doesn't sound that long, but it was. So, yeah, that happened. No, excuse me. That was pretty wild. And it was really cool, the fact that it happened with 2 other people here. It kind of validates the things I've been saying, I think. So that was pretty wild. Another thing I want to tell you guys before I get into the interview with Anthony here is it was kind of interesting. Last week, my mom and dad were over for Mother's Day, and we were talking about this podcast and people I've been talking to and that kind of stuff. And my dad told me 2 stories that I had never heard before. Now, you guys have heard the story of the Whistler. He forgets now because I brought it up to him. He doesn't remember that. But that same time period, he actually saw 2 shadow people. And we've talked about shadow people quite a bit on this show with multiple guests, actually, including, I think, Anthony here tonight. We'll get into that just a little bit. But, yeah, so he apparently has saw a shadow person on 2 separate occasions, once outside and once inside. So I'm going to try to get him to be on my show and kind of talk about that. I mean, he's agreed to being on the show in the past, and it'll be kind of cool, I think, to get his take. And typically, I thought I've heard all of his stories, but apparently I haven't. So it's interesting. So that's 2 more ghost stories from the house that I lived in for years and where they still live that I didn't know about until just last week. So we'll definitely get him back on the show. And I know I also promised some more activities for this week, but I'm going to save them, I've decided. We had quite an active experience over the weekend on Friday night, and then again yesterday morning. And so with all of that, I mean, that could be a podcast in itself probably, but I'll give you guys the real quick gist. It's a lot to get into. I don't want to get into it all right now, but I did promise you a little bit of multiple activities, so I'll give you the gist. Basically, Danae started a channel like we've discussed in previous episodes, and it got weird. Shit got a little crazy, but whatever. That's going to be a different podcast and all on its own. So that happened, and it felt weird and different. And then on Sunday, here's where it gets kind of weird. On Sunday, the rain was coming. I realized, my windshield wipers are kind of messed up. I wanted to go check them before the rain came. And it was something that I typically wouldn't think about, but I know a few weeks ago, I noticed they were kind of looking raggedy. So I wanted to get them changed before this rain came. So I went out and looked at the wipers, and the middle part of the driver's side wiper blade was missing. And I don't know if you guys know anything about wiper blades, but there's a middle part of the actual blade that attaches to the part of the car. And that being said, I don't know shit about wiper blades, so it's not a very specific detail thing, but you know what I'm saying. And you know where it snaps in. Where that snaps in wasn't there. It was literally just the wiper blade itself was just sitting on the fucking, I guess it's a, what's the word I'm looking for here? It's like a curve shape rod is what I have or whatever. U-shape, whatever the fuck it is. And it was literally just hanging onto it. If I would hit that wiper blade, the shit would have flew off. It wasn't attached to anything. I have no idea how that happened, but it was just straight up missing. I've never seen that happen before in my life. And there was no real reason for me to check it other than my hunch of, maybe I need new blades before this rain of death comes for the next 2 days. So, of course, that was 8 o'clock at night, and Walmart just closed because of the new hours, thanks to, the COVID. So I was kind of out of luck, and Danae and I both get up real early. We get up around 4:30 or 5 in the morning, and she has to be at work at 6, me at 7. So I was like, well, I can't drive to fucking Cincinnati with no windshield wipers with this rain coming. So we decide to, I'll drop her off at her work. I'll take the car that has function wiper blades and go, and then she'll get a ride home with her friend Megan, who lives right down the street from us. So she texts Megan in the morning, and she's like, hey, can I get a ride with you? And she's like, well, hey, funny enough, my car doesn't work. My car also broke down. My battery died. And she has a pretty new car, and we were just at her house on Saturday night. So we did that weird paranormal shit here on Friday night, went to that girl's house on Saturday night, and then Sunday, our car had a weird-ass dysfunction, and her car also broke down the next morning. Just very odd things. Now, granted, I'm not saying, it's definitely a ghost. They're both very explainable in their own ways. Sure, cars break down all of the time. But just how they coincide, it's weird. I mean, again, I'm not saying, it's definitely paranormal because cars break down. But it's just the timing of that was pretty wild. Especially since the last time that her car broke down was when she was with Danae talking about ghosts, and we had to go sage their house that night. So that was weeks ago, months ago even. So it was pretty wild. So that's weird. But again, when it comes to the real paranormal shit that happened on Friday night, that's probably going to be next week's paranormal activity, and it won't be an activity of the week. That's going to be a whole conversation of its own. So yeah, that's this week's, I should say, paranormal activities of the week. Hope you all enjoyed them. And and honestly, guys, when that shit went down this weekend, I almost said, fuck the podcast, I'm going to stop. But I thought about it. I'm like, I can't let the ghost win. So I'm going to keep pushing, and we'll figure out what the fuck is going on, and we'll take care of it, and we'll keep learning about it and see what actually is on the other side. Also, real big announcement before I forget, because if I don't say it now, I will forget. I decided it's going to be have a cool project coming up. One, I'm going to start doing on-site, or I guess on-location episodes of paranormal activities. I'm going to go to local hotels and haunted locations, stay the night in the hotels and that kind of stuff, and do live episodes at that location. So get the history of the building, the ghost sightings, all that good stuff, and then do the episode inside. I think that sounds like a blast and a hell of a good time. So that's going to be something that you guys can look forward to coming up. And also, I'm going to go take the day in my hometown of St. Mary's, Ohio, and kind of do the same thing, but probably more of a documentary style, and then just edit everything together to make it one episode. But go around there because that town, I think, has a lot of paranormal stuff going on from what I've felt and seen and heard from when I lived there for years and years and years. And there's all kinds of urban legends and sightings in that town. So I'm going to go hang out there. We got the Hodag of the lake. We got a bloody bridge. We have all kinds of good stuff in a pretty creepy cemetery. So yeah, that's going to be something to look forward to as well. So now, all of that being said, we have Anthony on the line. So let's go ahead and get to Mr. Anthony Tyler, who wrote Dive Manual, Empirical Investigations of Mysticism. How's it going, sir?
Going great. Pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me on.
I appreciate you being on. And did I say the title of that book correctly?
Empirical Investigations of Mysticism.
Gotcha.
Dive Manual.
I gotcha. My bad. I'm not the greatest with the words. Right. Excellent.
What's that?
So I'm not the greatest when it comes to reading, so bear with me a little bit.
No problem, man.
All right, awesome. Again, I appreciate you being on. And so if you can, like, what exactly, I know you have that book on Amazon. What exactly is the book about? I did read a little bit of it. I know you sent me a copy. I skimmed through it. I tried to read the entire thing, but I got busy, so I didn't make it through. But so what's it about exactly?
So it's kind of an amalgamation of things because I really wanted to write a nonfiction piece about, I don't know, something like tongue-in-cheek, like a modern grimoire, like a old school magical alchemical text of people trying to figure out recipes for ways to physical recipes for ways to improve psychology is one way to put it, I guess. So it's a bit of that, empirical investigations being looking at things like traditional, ceremonial magic and dissecting some esotericism that's been kind of co-opted by New Age, things like astrology and numerology, even tarot. These things, they have a much older history than basically the New Age in general is something I consider to be pretty washed up. I mean, I'm not trying to put myself on a pedestal here and say that I have all the answers by any stretch of the imagination. And I'm certainly not the first one to do an empirical approach to this. I'm very transparent with my inspirations and sources in the book. But I think it's important, and it's something that's not often done to the extent that it should be, this integration of modern science with our tradition and heritage. In postmodern society, there's all this abolishment of our traditions. And granted, those things should be updated. I could put it like this. A lot throughout the book, the basis is science, psychology, like depth psychology, dream analysis, hypnosis. These are chaos theory is a very important crux. These are in evolutionary psychology in general, all the kind of tenets that I'm working with here. But I'm also paying just as much homage and respect to the traditional body of comparative religion. Comparative religion, not meaning that all religions are literally one and the same, because that's an idea that gets tossed around, which is just completely ill-founded. But they all have similar motifs. They're all working with the same archetypes and dealing with the same psychological principles and dilemmas, etc. So they're certainly similar in many respects, but not copy-paste the same. And while I think that doctrine is important to respect, I think dogma, which is a little bit different, they go hand in hand, but this superstitious kind of us versus them idea that, or a sentiment that dogma creates, is something that I'm definitely, that's one of the biggest hangups I have with religion in general. So you can find throughout the book that I'm not necessarily towing the line for anything in particular. I'm just looking at the empirical data, because it's often forgotten that before the advent of modern science as we know it, spiritualism and comparative religion, that was how people utilize science. It's what you could call a heuristic science. People using trial and error methods and approaches to survival and adaptation, things that may or may not necessarily be true in a literal sense, but because of the end result, because it gets them to an end result that they can rely on, whether or not they know the details in between fully, that still counts for something. And that is what that's the description of something heuristic, essentially, which is a term used in evolutionary psychology. So, and that's how I look at mysticism and comparative religion in general. I think that while we might not know all the pieces in between, we at least know how these things affect us physically. You can speculate all you want or theorize about ontology, like the nature of things and what exactly is present in like the metaphysical realm. But the fact that beliefs in and of themselves, regardless of whether or not they're true, have demonstrable, tangible, pro-adaptive responses, I guess you could say. I mean, that's something that too few people seem to take into account today, because that's a large, crucial piece, like a cornerstone of our adaptation process as a species, this whole unconscious realm of the mind and our dreams, how we incubate our cultural and our cultural ideals and the ways we look at the world. Dreaming in and of itself is very much an adaptation process of processing all this sensory input and integrating it. And the dreams are probably one of the easiest examples to give people in terms of the relevance of what you could call heuristic mysticism. So I don't know if you got any questions. I mean, I could keep rambling, but I don't know if you
sure.
got anything in mind.
I'm going to be honest with you. A lot of the words you're using, I'm not that familiar with, but I'll try to do my best to keep up. And you mentioned the dream stuff. I mean, I really do believe that dreaming in and of itself is much deeper than we say, or what I guess we think, or what society believes. I don't really know. But yeah, it's definitely an interesting topic when it comes to paranormal and just life in general, I would say. So I guess exactly my big question is with your book, like what started that process? Like what made you want to write a book of this nature?
It kind of essentially started with my own personal dream analysis. I started having, and this runs as a narrative in the book. Some of it's nonfiction, and it's kind of an amalgamation of that nonfiction with details in my life that I really wouldn't have been able to describe. It would have been much harder and much drier to describe the information and present it in any sort of relatable way without giving some of my personal stories. So I didn't try to get bogged down with a story all about me, though. And there's even some like what you could call like more traditional fictional elements in it. There's a little bit. There's a few different things going on, and it took a while to get the book out because it wasn't so much the writing process as it was the editing, because there's a lot going on, and I wanted to make it be pretty info dense but digestible at the same time. So I've gotten good feedback about that so far. But so it's point being, it's nothing exactly straightforward, but it's easy enough to follow. And I needed to, I just needed to understand my dreams and the existential crisis that they were giving me insight into. And after a while, you start analyzing dreams, and for me, I got into evolutionary psychology and understanding archetypes and how symbols have essentially biological correlates, meaning these symbols aren't just, and even the things we experience in our imagination are that whole aspect of our psyche. It's indicative of biological needs and drives, and maybe not only. I'm not trying to be reductionist here, but that certainly is a huge part of it. So once you start to understand that more, at least for me, I wanted to look more into symbols. That's why I started looking into tarot and other things like astrology, because I didn't have an agenda. I wasn't trying to gain any sort of like future telling abilities or advanced powers. I just wanted to understand symbols.
Sure.
And what kind of role they played in the psyche. And if you're open to those things but skeptical, you use Occam's razor, the most logical conclusion to things, the most likely answer, then there's a lot to be said about these things. I mean, I could definitely go into that a little bit, but given that part of the show and your interest is paranormal experiences, there's plenty to be said about that as well. And the book has a very strong chapter that deals with like strong as in like dense, with several different stories within it about different like UFO experiences I've had, and even some paranormal encounters, but I don't necessarily count them strictly speaking because it's completely open and part of the story in the book. But so some of those were during like psilocybin mushroom trips. So
fair enough.
but they were still right. Yeah. Reason I even bring those up is because they taught me so much about symbolism. And the projection process of the psyche, how we project what's inside of us into the world around us, and it's hard to tell hard to differentiate sometimes, and it does, even when you're fully sober. I think that I think there's so much to be said about the paranormal experience in esotericism, and that's kind of, you don't hear, at least I don't hear a whole lot of like ghost hunters talking about. They seem to be studied in like just trying to record any sort of like communication, but there's no
like EVPs
real.
Yeah.
I just think that there's so much more information to inform people about the paranormal experience that a lot of paranormal researchers. And don't get me wrong, there are some who are on the ball, but I don't think that esotericism is talked about enough because, I mean, the more you look at it, the more, well, here, let's take this as example, because this is something that is a pretty decent focal point in the book for its scientific value. The shadow people's sleep paralysis is extremely interesting because this takes us I consider this to be very much like one of the thresholds between esotericism and more just specified paranormal research. And because the shadow people of sleep paralysis has been happening as long as history has been recorded, and it's always been associated with demonology and the same. The people have been seeing the shadow people since they've been having sleep paralysis, and it's informed a lot of demonology as we know it today. In fact, it's probably one of the biggest cornerstones of demonology. And
I agree with. I can kind of attest to that a little bit. Going with sleep paralysis, I've experienced sleep paralysis pretty often for the last decade or so, and I've seen the shadow people and all kinds of crazy ass things actually, and it's terrifying. So it absolutely makes sense that, especially before science really kicked in and practicalities. But it makes sense that people's immediate fear, especially back in the day, was demons, because that's what it feels like. It's scary, and you can feel it, you think you see it, and it's absolutely terrifying. But then once you realize what it actually is, that kind of goes away. But in my mind, it makes sense that the initial reaction is demons or ghost or whatever, because I was ready to move out of my house the first time it happened. And then once I realized what it was, you can calm down. But yeah, I mean, absolutely, that sleep paralysis, shadow people, the old hag, as some call it, it definitely feels like an evil presence. Obviously, it's not, but it definitely feels that way. So I can absolutely see how those two things go hand in hand.
Yeah, and you know, again, not to I hate to be a reductionist about it, because I'm not saying that this is where it all ends in terms of just pure biology, but this is certain. If the trail goes any further than this, and it starts to get a lot wooier and like exponentially more metaphysical, then this is at least where the trail starts. And just for the record, for any listeners, I don't think that someone is being like possessed or haunted by a literal demon. But this is something I get into in the book. When you're looking into these kind of things, like entities in general, because like I said, whether or not it's strictly paranormal or more esoteric, like talking about angels and demons as opposed to ghosts, we're dealing with the same structures and psychological processes, like mental structures, that is to say. So, yeah, when you're looking into these things, there's two really important questions. First off, being what it even is to begin with, obviously, and the second being what its purpose is. So, is it sentient? Is it something that has its own thought process on the other side of it, looking back at you? And also, why? Why? Because whether or not it's sentient, although a very interesting question, kind of a runaround. It doesn't really help us get any more of a bearing on the situation. And scientific evidence has shown, especially in the last few years, that, as example, sleep paralysis is indicative of stress in some way. Sure. It's a projection process of where stress in one form or another, just to generalize it a little bit, usually, and it's oftentimes like severe stress, like it could be trauma, but it also, people who don't have extremely traumatic past still have sleep paralysis, and it can also be an incremental thing, like people who have anxiety and these other things. But there's a lot of different reasons, but it seems that science is telling us through the data. There are some interesting studies that people can check out on this, that it's some sort of purge of tension in the psyche, and it's kind of jamming the sleep process a little bit. You can also, I also think it, in some cases, maybe it's not even stress related. It's just the fact that you have people in general are having sleep issues. There's all sorts of hormonal processes, how much melatonin, and if you're just not getting deep enough sleep, you can wake up in the middle of that process and find yourself projecting these shadow people. So it's not necessarily to say that these things are evil, because some people have, they're always kind of eerie. I don't think anyone's really pleased to see a shadow person, but I have talked to, many people that say it's not overtly horrifying. It's just confusing and maybe slightly ominous. And then other people say it's downright horrifying. So there is a spectrum. Let's talk about projection a little bit, because I think I think this is something that's not often brought up enough when considering the paranormal experience.
So
Carl Jung,
what do you mean by projection
the
exactly?
psychoanalyst that right. Carl Jung termed that originally, and he is, for people who don't know, he's the father of archetypal psychology. He's the guy who he was under the tutelage of Freud initially, and they veered off because they were both interested in the archetypes of the psyche, the symbols, but Freud thought it was better to repress these things, and Jung thought it was better to investigate them in an alchemical way, meaning overcoming and conquering the negative aspects of the psyche instead of just repressing them. And so the projection process is how we articulate our own personal experiences in the world around us. They say, well, just as a really easy example, everyone's had these kind of moments where you got really mad at somebody, and then you cool out, and after a while you realize, wow, I really shouldn't have even been that mad at them. I was really, it was something that was going on in my life that caused me to have a weird kind of chain reaction, and I lashed out. That is a projection, and that happens. That's a two-way street. That's good and bad.
Okay.
Love, genuine love being a very, what esotericists consider a very sacred alchemical projection, one of the best projection processes that can occur. And that, because projection isn't inherently a bad thing. It's not wholly a neurotic thing, but more often than not, it tends to, neuroticism can be found all throughout the projection process. And that this is what spiritualism and mysticism is. It's kind of grabbing the reins of that projection process, because it's essentially, I guess, if you want to get a real concrete definition, a general one, the projection is the unconscious mind making itself known to the conscious experience in one form or another, and it's oftentimes not obvious. It is if you're thinking about it, but there's a whole self-reflection process, meditation, whatever you have to do to get into that self-reflective state. You're probably not going to be recognizing your projections, at least not initially, until you give yourself that space and time to consider how you are personally affecting your circumstances. And Carl Jung actually wrote a book. It's not that long. It's under 200 pages, I believe, about this projection process and the UFO phenomena. And he had some really interesting points of view. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Fortean investigator John Keel, the guy who wrote the Mothman Prophecies.
A little bit. I know a little bit. I've seen his book. I've never read it, and I've obviously seen the movie a long time ago. But
cool. Well, yeah, that's another great source, because to my knowledge, the two weren't really in communication or anything, and I think I'm pretty sure Jung died a couple decades or so before Keel really got into the mix of the Mothman Prophecies. And he never talked about Jung or anything, but they're astonishingly similar in their ideas. And I never heard Keel mention the word archetype or anything, but he himself talked about how UFOs, for example, and also the Men in Black. He didn't just talk about UFOs. There's the whole Mothman and what was going on during the Mothman Prophecies in the 1960s Point Pleasant, for that year before the collapse of the Silver Bridge, is just astonishing. The whole town was just metaphorically had their hand on a hot stove of paranormal activity. They were just getting burnt up. It's quite a story, even if some of it is embellished, and I'm not saying that it is necessarily, and even if some people like to say, there might have been some government either of those things. There's so much activity going on there of all different kinds. Excuse me, hold on. There's definitely an anomalous quality to it. And Keel, that is essentially why he named the book The Mothman Prophecies, because he didn't really know how to wrap his head around all this, and his best guess was that the Mothman was some sort of psychical projection of the people. Again, not to say that whether or not it's sentient on the other side, but at least in terms of conjuring it, for lack of a better term, for it manifesting itself or being there at all,
right.
Whatever it's representing. It's a projection process from the people, knowing that there was going to be this massive Silver Bridge collapse, like right before Christmas, that killed like 100+ people in this small town. It was a total tragedy, and it completely redefined the whole world's outlook on engineering bridges, as a matter of fact. So it was actually really significant, and it's an interesting idea, especially when you start to look into Jung and how he describes the projection process of the UFOs. And none of these guys, this is also why I like them, because none of these guys are saying that they have the end-all, be-all answers. They're just saying, like, this is where, Occam's razor, this seems to be the most likely answer with the data we have.
Right.
And I also like to, another great example of this is the old Taoist / Buddhist notion of the hungry ghost. And the hungry ghost, as legend goes, was an unrested soul of an individual who was enslaved in some way psychologically throughout their life, whether it be addiction or, essentially, like, whether it be drug addiction or other addictions, but the motif is addiction in some way. And the hungry ghost would be this, it's not evil, it's not a demon, but it's parasitic all the same. It's a very neutral, sort of ominous, not necessarily ominous, but it's certainly not a productive thing. It's not really going to help you. And it would, let's take the example of drug addiction. A person tries a drug, and for the first however long it takes them to get physically addicted, it's pretty much choice. And then when they get physically addicted and they go down the whole drug rabbit hole, and maybe they get clean, and they make it over the hump of the physical withdrawals and all that, but they still have that gnawing thing inside their head. It's just like, what's it going to hurt? What's it going to hurt? It's like the monkey on your back or the demon on your shoulder. The ancient, it was mainly in China and Vietnam, this hungry ghost notion. It was this thing that was basically being tortured, not by a god, but by its own actions in the afterlife. And it was resulting in some sort of psychological inertia in your life, something compelling you, sapping away at your free will, not taking it away entirely, but definitely like clouding it a lot. And so the old tradition there was to no exorcism, nothing like that. It was give it an offering of whatever it is that it seems to be around you for, and allow it to go away in peace. Give it what it needs so that it doesn't need to suck your like psychic energy, for lack of better terms. So
I got a real quick question for you here. Going back to that.
Sure.
One of the things with this show is I like to know how things work, or ask how or why that goes the way it goes. So when you say offer that thing an offering, how would you do that? So like if you're addicted to drugs, and how would you present that offering to get it to go away?
That is a good question. And in terms of like traditionally, they usually had like some sort of quick like altar or something that they would set it at, and in their backyard or wherever. And but I don't remember the exact details of that. But in like, I guess if you wanted to dissect the like heuristic psychological reason for that, way I see it, when I'm performing like self-hypnosis, these kind of things, I give offerings to the sentiments that I'm trying to, like I do a lot of prayer and meditation, not as much as I should, but I still try to do quite a bit. And the things I have these heuristic kind of relationships with is, like the Great Mother, the Great Father, and the Logos. That Logos being like some people call it like the guardian angel. It could be considered archetypally speaking, like Christ or Buddha. I kind of consider myself a little bit of a hermeticist, but it's a little tongue-in-cheek. Like I don't necessarily subscribe to anything in particular. But see, these things are biological motivating factors. They're undeniable. We all have these masculine and feminine archetypes within the psyche. Reason being, not for some sort of sexual indicator or marker, but these things act on the psyche very much the way that the proton and electron act, and physically speaking. So we're dealing more with, like I said, like biological adaptive forces here. Masculine being active and feminine being passive, not in the ways of what you would look at like in terms of sociology, but in terms more of like physics. Because actually, while I was kind of veering off, I'll get back to Hungry Ghost thing. But chaos theory, not only a cornerstone of like actual physics, the physical sciences, but also a cornerstone of psychology as we know it. I mean, the more you look into chaos theory, the more you see how it's so much easier to understand why and how things are so interrelated. But I digress. So if you're giving an offering to something, as an example of this heuristic process, it's when people talk about faith and like belief, it's important to have some sort of state of suspended disbelief. You could be as skeptical as you like afterward, but and it's interesting because the paranormal experience seems to draw this state of suspended disbelief out of us without trying, whereas the religious experience, oftentimes, not always, the mystical experience, a better term I like to use, seems to be something disciplined, something you have to work at, and
that makes sense. I mean, I know with
giving an offer.
When it comes to paranormal, you have to have some kind of disbelief, because if you believe in everything, then nothing you see is what you think it is, and you can't trust that kind of thinking process, I guess, if that makes sense. But yeah, that absolutely makes sense with what you're saying with religion compared to paranormal.
Right on. I appreciate that. But yeah, so like a heuristic faith process is not having some sort of well, let me put it this way. There's been studies out now that show that people have they receive effect from placebos even when they know they're placebos. Might not be quite as strong, but it's still there. And with multiple personality disorders, people will change eye color between personalities. They'll change birthmarks. It's astounding. And that's only the tip of the iceberg. So, and from there, you start to wonder about like old tales of like pre-stigmata, and there are different equivalents of those kind of like sacred anomalous wounds all over the world, all throughout comparative religion in different ways. And so you see that like this projection process has a sort of two-way street, and with offerings, like so with spiritualism, and offerings specifically, it's you making the two-way street. Like it's that's what shamanism is. You take all these feathers and beads and put them on a stick, and it's using one way to put it is the language of your unconscious mind. The way that your dreams speak to you, and evoking that kind of state of suspended disbelief, what they would call in psychology priming. Using non-related environmental conditions to achieve a desired result in your psyche. So it's hypnotic suggestion and all these things. And the paranormal experience is fascinating because it seems to really, really challenge a person's state of belief. Whereas, there are cases of all throughout religion of people having like mystical epiphanies and stuff. So that certainly happens, like this out of blue questioning of your mentality through spiritualism. But that's the outlier. Whereas with the paranormal experiences and even ufology, that is not the outlier. That's the norm, where it's not like you're praying to something or giving an offering. This thing comes out of nowhere, it hits you like a ton of bricks, and you're left wondering more often than not, did that even happen? What just happened? I know I saw it, I know I heard it, I know I experienced it, but I just can't believe that it would happen. And
that's absolutely true. Because I'm a science person. I like science. I think, my science book says it goes. There are certain things that can and cannot happen, and I believe that for the most part. But then there are times when I'm sitting here and I hear banging on my wall. Well, what the fuck was that? Science can't tell me what that was. A lot of times it can, but at the same time, from all of our experiences, a lot of the times it cannot, from what I've seen and heard. And that's what piques everybody's interest is, especially those who experience this kind of stuff. Science can't dictate that. So what else is out there that can explain that to me? I think that's kind of one part of the drive when it comes to people who are sensitive to the paranormal, is they want to know why. And my science book won't tell me, so what will? Yes.
And there's every reason to follow that instinct of trying to understand why. It's just important to maintain a sort of discipline in one form or another, because if you're not careful, these things can start to get a little Lovecraftian, and you start to wonder too much what's real and what's not. That's like the beginning of the descent into madness. So
absolutely.
Right. It's important to walk what the Buddha called the middle path with these things. Like have your facts and beliefs, because they're both important. They both play their own adaptational role. Know the difference, and always have that. This is part of the human experience. Always stoke that fire, that kind of hero's journey within you, to try and reconcile facts with belief. Try and get the full picture, but understand that you're probably not going to get the full picture, and be okay with that.
Yep,
I'm sorry, were you going to say something?
I'm about to say absolutely. You can't expect to have all the answers, especially in a topic or category that there are no right or wrong or final answers to. So if you think you're going to find those answers, you're just driving yourself to fail, and that, like you said earlier, it will drive you to madness. So you can't expect to come out knowing everything.
On the note before, to put a little bow on top of that, with the projection processes and the idea of creating the two-way street with spiritualism and stumbling onto the two-way street with the paranormal experience, it seems to me, like it seemed to Jung and Keel and others, that these are basically two sides to the same coin. They're kind of, in a sense, the inversion of each other. And so that's why, I guess, any takeaway for a listener from all this is just, you totally get the book if you like, because I definitely go into quite a bit more detail about these things. But I think one informs the other. If you're into paranormal activity, look more into esotericism and some like Manly Palmer Hall, great example. A guy, 33rd degree Freemason. He was really open with the public. The exact opposite of what you would think from a Freemason. Guy's got very transparent too. He's dead now, but that's can't go wrong with that. And I guarantee you that is going to inform, especially experiences that you've had. If someone is stuck in that in-between state where they're like, I don't even know how to process some of the things I've experienced, look into esotericism and, use scrutiny. Don't take everything at face value, but consider what else is out there, and vice versa. Someone who is interested in esotericism, best do their due diligence and understand how esotericism is, or how paranormal activity in many ways is like a continuation, because paranormal activity is something that's always been with us, and it's like, it really is our modern mythology. People wonder, like, I don't know. I think people sometimes are kind of fooling themselves. They think they live in this like rational age of no mumbo jumbo.
No, absolutely.
And the strict sciences, materialism, and it's just like these things are still happening all of the time. Like pretty much anybody you talk to, if they haven't had some sort of unexplainable experience, whether it's like dreaming of something before it happened, or because that's happened to me before. I can't claim to know how to do it by any stretch of the imagination, but it has happened, and that's a super common thing, actually. And UFOs, very common thing. So regardless of whether or not you want to explain these things away and say that they don't real, well, why are people still seeing them? You can't just pretend they don't exist. There's something going on here.
Talking about UFOs,
we can be skeptical all we want, but just to discard these is useless.
When you talk about the UFOs, the Navy just released like 3 or 4 videos last week claiming they have video footage of UFOs, and they're not sure what they were, unidentified flying objects. So now the Navy's even like, yeah, they're out there. Granted, they're not saying they're aliens or whatever, but they absolutely are out there. And I mean, honestly, when it comes to the aliens, I feel like there has to be, right?
Right, absolutely. That's something else interesting that we could talk about a little bit more. Is what is exactly going on with UFOs? Because I think I touched on this a little bit, explaining them with the projection process, but to elaborate a little more, I'm certainly not discounting, nor did Keel or Jung or anybody else, that these could be at least in fraction, like some of the experiences could be legitimate extraterrestrials in hardware. No one's throwing that idea out the window, but the more when you look at it in comparison with, like, this is almost like an inverted Ancient Aliens in a way. Like, UFOs really do have a kind of integral part in our this sort of like metaphysical heuristic realm of our adaptation. And people like myself and Jung didn't see that as flesh and blood aliens coming down and helping people, so much as they saw it as more like basically that the UFO phenomena and the paranormal experience and mysticism are one and the same, really. And let's see, from there, I think that it's probably a little bit of all three. I would not. I mean, I can't say with any certainty that there's extraterrestrials out there, or I don't doubt at all that there are extraterrestrials out there. I doubt I have a healthy amount of skepticism that they might not be visiting us, but I'm totally open to the possibility. So
I absolutely agree with that. I mean, I've always said that too. Like when people ask me that question, it's like I would almost guarantee you that there is definitely alien life on other planets or moons or wherever. I mean, there are so many out there. How couldn't there be? But at the same time, have the UFOs or aliens visited Earth? Those are two separate questions. And it's harder to believe they've been to Earth than that they exist somewhere else. And I'm with you. I wouldn't be surprised if they were on Earth, but at the same time, I would be less to guarantee it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's also really interesting that it's not like people were, when I say that UFOs have common themes and are very, very similar to like the spiritualism. It's interesting to note that, and I certainly won't discount the fact that even when they were associated with spiritualism, these things were considered fairly mechanical. You talk about like chariots in the sky, the chariots of the gods and stuff. So we're dealing with some really interesting uniform material, the same way as like sleep paralysis, for example. And so even if it's not aliens, something is definitely going on here, and it's definitely. I don't think the jury's out as to what, if it is part of this projection process, and it's not flesh and blood. It doesn't mean that something isn't sentient on the other side, or maybe, who knows, man? This is possible. Maybe they become flesh and blood when we interact with them. Maybe it's some sort of it could be some sort of dimensional thing, and because of our altered state of consciousness, for a variety of whatever given reasons, trauma, etc., we happen to project something out that is picked up by something like a tuning, like a radio transmitter tuning into a station, and that station is this UFO activity happening, and it would have been there maybe regardless of whether you tuned in or not, but you just happened to be at the right place at the right time, or the wrong place at the wrong time. You just happen to stumble into it, and once you transmit that frequency, maybe it becomes physical, like a person changing birthmarks between their different personalities, or a priest having stigmata. And again, this is why I'm talking about this stuff, because I don't have all the answers. I just think that it's really worth looking into, and there's a lot more. There are a lot of avenues of research that we can look into about these things, because I wonder, I don't discount that people see Bigfoot as another example. I've always loved the idea of Bigfoot, and there are some crazy crackpots out there, but I don't discount the fact that people see those things. But why aren't they finding bodies? I mean, sure, there could be scavengers. It's not like you find a bunch of carcasses in the woods of anything, really. But
right.
It's weird that you would never find any bodies ever. Maybe it's just a projection.
It's funny you bring that up, because I listened to another ghost podcast, basically, and they talk about Bigfoot quite a bit. And I've never really been one to believe in Bigfoot. I never have. It's never interested me. But they have some people on there who tell these stories about Bigfoot sightings and huntings and all of that kind of stuff. And it kind of makes me want to believe in Bigfoot a little bit. Like they talk about how like Bigfoot moves from side to side rather than forward to frontward, and like he glides through the trees and shit like that. And they even talk about, I think somebody did once, about how he is, interdimensional being, and that's why there are no bodies and stuff. And so like at first it's kind of like, come on, but then I'm hearing so many people saying similar stories. It's like, well, shit, maybe he is out there, and it's not your basic, walking with big gangly arms across the creek kind of thing, but it's more complex than that.
Yeah, I think there's something to it, and this is something I picked up from. I keep bringing them up, but they are the cornerstones of. They're the godfathers of this kind of discussion. Jung and Keel, they were the first ones reading them, where it was really impressed upon me that the most important thing to look at before anything else with these able to effectively lie about a paranormal experience in a way that is not very believable, or so it's important to I guess first, it's a case-by-case study. You figure out if you think this is a credible source or a witness or not. And if it is, then you've got to look at their reaction to this, because a person can't fake real, genuine terror and wonder as well, like someone being in complete awe, because these things aren't always terrifying, but more often than not they are, because even if they're not intended to come across terrifying, like the Mothman never really hurt anybody, but just the unknown factor of it is terrifying in and of itself.
Absolutely.
So,
absolutely.
These things often are terrifying. And where was I going with that?
Well, that's all right.
So many places, I lost my train of thought.
I hear it. Well, we are getting kind of short on time here. So one question for you that I know earlier you mentioned that you have had a paranormal, or a UFO experience, I should say, a UFO phenomena experience. Do you mind telling us that story?
Yeah, no problem. I'd love to. That goes hand in hand with what I was saying. I just remembered, so I'll wrap that up a little bit.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you can't fake these real things, and that's why it's important to look into this projection process, because there's no way to scientifically understand how a person can have a real, tangible experience, something that deeply affects them on a psychological and therefore even physical level, if they don't know whether it's true or not. If no one knows whether it's true or not, like, how are you going to wrap your head around that? How is something that you don't even know whether or not it's physical having physical ramifications? And that's where projection comes in. That's why I think it's such a crucial part of this conversation. And in terms of my UFO experiences, I have several actually from my time living in Alaska. Born in Georgia, raised in Alaska.
Oh, very cool.
And I don't know what they were. My best guess, because I was sober. I was completely. There was a little bit of weed involved with some of them, but I wasn't like
I hear you.
baked out of my mind or anything. Some of them I was completely sober anyway.
Right.
And so I don't think that there's any sort of projection. I didn't feel like I was in any sort of like state of surrealism, because you could kind of tell. At least I feel like you can. Especially if you're familiar with hypnosis or meditation, you can tell when you're starting to like slip into that state of suspended disbelief. It's an actual thing. It's something that you can notice, and nothing about the situations ever seemed like it was hard to tell, or like wondering if I was really seeing it. I mean, although I certainly wondered what it was, but it really looked as so physical that either the projection process is even more intense, and there's even more to be said about it than I understand, or these things were government craft, most certainly, or the potential that maybe they were aliens. But I mean, if we're using Occam's razor here, got to be either a projection or government. And I don't, from my experience with these things, like I said, it didn't really seem to be a state of particular surrealism. And I know that there's a lot of government, that people wouldn't even be in that state if not for the military bases and the Air Force bases in particular. And I live very close to an Air Force base. They're guaranteed doing all sorts of experimental work up there. I mean, in the history of the state, like, since they've declassified things over the years, they've admitted that they do a lot of experimental craft testing up there. And I saw things, just to summarize some of the experiences. I have it written down, but honestly, I don't even remember offhand how many of them there was. I kind of stopped counting. There was like well over 5 or 6. And there were other times where I looked up in the sky and I thought I saw one. I was like, I don't need more of these stories. I don't know how to explain this. So I already got enough of these UFO sightings. That's how common it was. And I also saw them with friends about half the time with many other people. And I saw things do like giant orbs in the sky. And I'll explain one that I saw real up close too. But I saw orbs in the sky all the time, like going like faster than a shooting star. I remember one time doing a 90-degree angle turn, not slowing down at all and continuing. There was all these like,
oh wow,
like as if stars were moving in like a what do you call it, like lapsed time footage, like of a flower blooming. It'd be like constellations and stars moving like so rapidly fast. Like there's nothing up there that makes any sense. And there was one time in particular where I was by myself. Actually, one time a friend and I saw one on the side of the road. It was in a neighborhood, and it was kind of like a dense, there's a lot of trees all around, but it was technically a neighborhood. It was pitch black at night, and it looked it looked the exact same as the other time. The only other time I got a real good shot at it, and it's this triangle, and it's got small indicator red and blue lights on the fin, and a bright ass white orb. And when I saw this thing on my own, and also these things are flying like just above the tree line. Okay, they're super close. It's definitely not a plane. It's like jaw dropping. And so this time that I see it by myself, I see something coming over the tree line. This is like probably like 15 miles away from the other sighting I just described. So same general area.
Okay.
And I think it's like a street light, it's like a bright white orb, but I notice it coming closer. And so I stand on top of a tool shed in my backyard and I watch this thing fly over. It's like barely above the houses, but it flies completely silent. And it's got, like I said, the small indicator lights and this giant white orb. And I hopped over my fence and I followed that thing as far as I could, just to get a good look at it. And every single time I saw these things, they always disappeared behind the Chugach mountain range. So a little tip for you ufology enthusiasts out there. The Chugach mountain range is the hotbed of UFO activity, most certainly.
That's pretty badass.
Yeah, for whatever reason. So
I'm a little jealous.
Pretty dumbfounded. No one really knows all my friends that have had the similar experiences, no one really knows what to make of it.
That's
but
fair.
Definitely something going on.
I believe that. I've had several paranormal.
It's really weird.
I'm sorry. So I've had several paranormal experiences, but I've had zero like UFO encounters or visuals, and I've always wanted to. So that kind of makes me a little jealous.
Yeah, well, likewise, because I've had some certainly interesting, unexplainable experiences, but nothing overtly paranormal in the strictest sense. But and as a final little detail for anyone interested in those sightings, it was really weird because sometimes it seemed like they were being really stealthy. Like the one that I saw fly just overhead in my neighborhood, the lights were noticeable, but they were not blinding. But in the sky, presumably they're the same thing. I mean, but I don't even know for sure. Sometimes I saw those same red and blue lights on those crazy things that were not planes doing like 90-degree angle turns in the sky and whatnot. So I think they're the same thing. But either way, they're both certainly UFO sightings, all of them. And so they seem to have this juxtaposition of like sometimes they were trying to be extremely stealthy and sometimes they were doing like acrobatics, like really impressive aerial maneuvers in the sky. So for the life of me, I still don't know, like, if it's government, I have no idea why they would be out there either. So
That's interesting.
Something I'm still pretty puzzled about, but
Absolutely.
glad to have the stories.
I believe I have to check into that. Alrighty, sir. I think that's going to go ahead and wrap up this interview. I really appreciate it, and I'd love to have you back on again, sometime in the future and hear more about everything that's going on. It's definitely an interesting topic and an interesting book, and what I've read, I've really enjoyed it. I'm going to go ahead and finish it once I get the time. But yeah, so be sure to check.
Yeah. So I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Yep, absolutely. I know you're on Twitter. What's your Twitter account?
You can find me at all lowercase dive mind 667 on Twitter, and you can buy the Dive Manual: Empirical Investigations of Mysticism, paperback or Kindle, the ebook action on Amazon. You can also find me on Facebook if you really want to. Anthony Tyler. I live in San Leandro, California, to narrow it down for you, and in the search. Other than that, man, I'd be happy to come on anytime. We could talk about all sorts of stuff. This is just the tip of the iceberg.
Yep, absolutely.
So, thanks for having me on.
Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. And stay safe. I know we're all living in a weird time right now with this COVID stuff. So stay safe out there and take care.
Yeah, likewise to you and to all the listeners. Everybody, stay safe and stay healthy, and hope you learned something. Thanks for having me on again, man. Appreciate it.
Thanks for being on. I appreciate you as well. Have a good night. Again, huge thanks to Anthony Tyler for being on the show, and please check out his book on Amazon, Dive Manual: Empirical Investigations of Mysticism, and also check him out on Twitter at DiveMind667, Anthony Tyler. And I think with all of that being said, that was a great interview, and I really enjoyed it, and that's going to go ahead and wrap up this episode of Paranormal Axetivities. Please be sure to tell your friends, tell your family, go to the website, hit subscribe, check out the YouTube channel. It is getting a little bit bigger, just a little bit, but barely. More videos to come yet, and website's on its way, so be ready for that. You can find us on Spotify, iTunes, or I guess it's Apple Music now, Google Music, wherever you find your podcast, that's where I'm located. Also, be sure to check out the RSH Wrestling Podcast, located on the same platforms and on Twitter as well. And also follow me on Twitter at Paranormal. Well, actually, it's at Axetivities is my name on there, Axetivities. And if you want to send me an email with your stories, or just tell me what you think, or tell me that I suck, whatever you want to do, you can email me at paranormalaxepodcast@gmail.com. And that's Axe, AXE. All right, guys, hope you enjoyed it. Stay safe out there, and let's just keep learning together.